Okay, so by looking at relative ages of fossils and then by dating the rocks those fossils are found in, we've got a pretty good estimate of the age of the Earth at 4.6 billion or 46,000 million years old. Okay, and I am going to ask you to learn part of this geological record because it's going to come up over and over again this semester. First things first, this bottom part right here. We're just going to call that, for our purposes for now, Precambrian. You don't need to memorize all those names right now, or, well, at all this semester, really. Precambrian, okay? Then the next era that we're going to talk about is the Paleozoic. The Paleozoic's divided into lots of parts, and you don't need to memorize all of them, but I would like you to know where the Cambrian is. It starts the Paleozoic off, and the Permian, and because it ends the Paleozoic. And these are two really important pieces, because the Cambrian contains what we call the Cambrian explosion. Which is when there's a huge diversification, at least preserved in the fossil record, of life, of animal life. Lots of animal phyla. All the animal phyla we know of exist by the end of the Cambrian. So lots of evolution and lots of fossilized parts evolved during this time. So it's easy to see them in the fossil record. Another thing then, at the end of the Permian, the end of the Paleozoic, that is the largest extinction known on Earth. So this is why these are going to come up. And I'm going to mention other things that happened during the Paleozoic this semester, okay? The Mesozoic. You should know that. The Mesozoic, you probably already know these. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. You don't need to memorize those for me right now, but I do want you to know this is the time of the dinosaurs, okay? Dinosaurs. And there's other things that you're going to learn about this, but that will help you remember the Mesozoic. At the end of the Cretaceous, that's when the dinosaurs go away. Okay, the end of the Mesozoic is when dinosaurs go away. And then the last part here is called the Cenozoic. And right now we are here now, part of the Cenozoic, which is divided up into smaller parts, but I'm not going to memorize all those, okay? But I would like you to know Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, and I recommend you know Cambrian and Permian. That will help. And if you want to memorize Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, that won't hurt you either. But be familiar with those times, those major time blocks. I have another image on this slide. You can pause the video to check it out. But there's another view of this exact same geologic record, except it shows you some of the major things that were happening on Earth at those different times. And I think that's a good reference to check out every once in a while. That's from the other edition of the book that we used to use. I don't know that your book has that fleshed out version of it. Okay, so what I want to point out, though, is that, first of all, this time scale goes from left to right. So back here is the beginning of the Earth, to the right is now. Notice that the Precambrian, that this part I told you was, these three things. It looks like just a little bit of the Earth's history. In reality, that is the bulk of the Earth's history. If we put it to roughly to scale here, you can see that it's the bulk of the timeline. Now, life emerges during the Precambrian. Single-celled prokaryotes show up, single-celled eukaryotes show up, multicellular eukaryotes show up in the Precambrian, and animals even show up just before the end of the Precambrian, and then we enter into the Paleozoic, where the Cambrian explosion happens. Okay, your book is going to talk about this word here, Phanerozoic. Let me just show you where that is, so you know when your book's talking about it. That's everything from the Paleozoic till now. It's sort of like when modern life was really kicking on, but I don't use that word very often. But your book may use it from time to time. Okay, so we can see that animals arise. Then the Cambrian explosion happens right here, the beginning of the Paleozoic. And then we have lots of important stuff happen, like the colonization of land, which we're going to spend a lot of time on this semester. The evolution of humans is just at the very tippity top of this scale. But you can see what I like about this diagram is that it puts these timelines into scale. You can see how long parts of the and this isn't even the whole Paleozoic. The Paleozoic is huge, and then there's these more modern timelines. If you want to see this put into scale, walk into the Lewis Science Center, and the whole hallway there on the, what is it, like the east side of the building, I think, is this timeline to scale painted down the length of the hallway, and you can get a feel. Most of the hallway is Precambrian. Okay, so I told you in the last video that there were different kinds of fossils. I want to spend a little bit more time on that before I move on, because fossils are kind of my thing. So we talked about different kinds of fossils and how we age things. Let's just look at how critters are preserved, how we know about critters from those different time periods. One kind of fossil that's really common is called impression or compression fossils. We just usually call them impression compression. This is when sediments kind of squish plants or animals into a flat carbon film on a rock. And I'm not going to make you tell the difference between impression or compression, but I'll tell you what it is. Impression is when you just have like a handprint or a shape of a critter in a rock. And compression is when you actually have bits of carbon, like you see here, from that organism still preserved on the rock. But these are common. These are flat fossils. Flat compression, and most of the things I've seen preserved this way are plants, but you do find some fossil critters this way, like animals as well. So this is when you have flat rock layers that you break the rock layers apart and you find these organisms inside. Mold cast fossils are also common. This is when you have, let's say you have some dirt here and and it's forming rock, and you had an organism. I'm just going to draw the organism as a box. Okay, there it is. It's a box. It's dead and it's buried in the sediment, and then it rots away and it leaves a hollow hole in the shape of itself there in the rock. And then other sediments fill in that hole and they harden up. And then later on you crack this thing open, and if you have that purple box there, that's called the cast. And sometimes you find just the shape, the hollowed out shape where it used to be, like the box here. Sometimes you just find that, and that's called the mold. So you get plants preserved this way, where they rotted away and left a hole in the rock, and then that hole in the rock filled up with other minerals, and you get a 3D mold. Or you can even get like dinosaur footprints here. You can see on this side's the mold and on this side's the cast. So the imprint of the foot is the mold, and then it fills in with rock, and when you separate those rock layers, they break apart into molds and casts. So it's pretty cool there. Oh, let's see here. All right. Another kind of fossilization is permineralization. That's when bones or cell walls of plants actually get impregnated with minerals, and we actually get cellular preservation. This is the kind of fossilization that I studied. So what you see on the right here is a plant root. It's cut in cross section. You're looking at it under a microscope, but you can see all the cells of the tissues of this plant root. It's because they are preserved at the cellular level. And before I move on, and this lets you understand the anatomy of these organisms. That's why it's so cool. The other kinds of fossils we saw, you just see the outside. This way you get to study the inside, or the structure of the bones of the organism. By the way, this Tyrannosaurus right here, her name is Sue. She's at the Chicago Museum. And sometime in February or March, I have to look at the calendar. Actually, I will look right now while I'm recording this, just to annoy you. I hate doing this during a recording. And by the way, this is only if you're watching this video during the spring semester of 2021. Let me make that clear in case this video is reused for anything. If you are taking this class right now, I want to point out that on February 19th, a friend of mine is giving a biology seminar on Zoom for our department, including you, about how this T-Rex died. She's a dinosaur paleontologist, so check that out if you get a chance. And I'll try to record it as well, and we can save it for those of you who can't make it. Oh, and before I move on, I told you this was a fossil plant root in cross-section, meaning it's cut in half. Fossil root. Do you see what's happening here? Here's the xylem and phloem. That's the vascular tissue that we'll talk about later this semester. And right here is a branch coming off the side. Look at this. This is a modern root, a living root that's been sectioned doing the exact same thing. So we can compare the anatomy of fossils to living things. Isn't that cool? And just to show you how I preserve these fossils are preserved in rock like this, and we etch them in acid. And then the acid eats away the rock, but it leaves the plant cell wall sticking up. Then we spray acetone on the surface, and we lay a sheet of cellulose acetate, which is like plastic, onto the top of the rock. And it melts to the rock, and it melts around those plant cell walls. And then when we peel these off, we look at them under a microscope, and we can see one cell layer thick sections of the plant material that's fossilized in that rock. So what we see here is a heart-shaped fruit. This is a heart-shaped fruit that is still unknown to science. It's something that I found in my fossils when I was in grad school, and we've never published on, but it's the cutest little heart-shaped fruit you'll ever see, but still doesn't have a name. I'm still not sure who it's related to. But that's how we study those. And we do that over and over again, and we section all the way through the fossil, and we can see its anatomy and its overall shape. So that's just a little further background on fossils. And when we pick up, I'm going to continue a little bit more about the origin of life, which we'll pick up more in the next chapter. And we're going to talk about some of the major trends then in evolution.